December 1939. Chełmno, a small town in the Warthegau region of Nazi-occupied Poland, lay under the grey shadow of winter frost, its cobbled streets empty except for the occasional uniformed patrol. The town's isolation, once an inconvenience for its few thousand residents, now presented a strategic advantage to the German occupiers. The nearby forests, dense and unbroken, provided concealment. The Water River, flowing quietly to the north, offered both access and a means of disposal. Within these constraints, the SS leadership began to evaluate Chełmno not as a village, but as a location for systematic industrialized murder. Herbert Lange, a young SS officer with experience in early Einsatzgruppen operations in the annexed territories of Poland, was dispatched to conduct preliminary surveys. Lange's reputation among his superiors in the Reich Security Main Office, RSHA, rested on efficiency. Where others hesitated at moral questions, Lange approached execution as a logistical problem. Paul Blobel, another seasoned SS officer known for his coordination of Einsatzgruppen killing units, consulted remotely, offering guidance based on prior operations in occupied Poland. By late 1939, the decision had been made. Chełmno would serve as a pilot site for what the Nazis euphemistically called special treatment, Sonderbehandlung. The first months of occupation were primarily administrative. SS units assessed available buildings, transport routes, and natural concealment features. The forests surrounding Chełmno, particularly the areas west and southwest of the village, were mapped for suitability. Their density made them ideal for shielding activities from both locals and aerial reconnaissance. The Water River, a slow-moving tributary, would later serve as a channel for disposing of remains, though these plans were not yet formalized. Most crucially, Chełmno's proximity, approximately 50 kilometers, from the Łódź ghetto allowed for predictable victim transports without significant risk of public exposure. Early records from the RSHA indicate that the choice of Chełmno was as much about geography as it was about precedent. In nearby areas, executions had been carried out in scattered sites, forests, riverbanks, and abandoned buildings. These efforts, while brutal, lacked the operational consistency and record-keeping desired by Berlin. Chełmno offered the opportunity to refine these methods under controlled conditions, creating a template for what the Nazis envisioned as an industrialized approach to mass murder. By early 1940, the first groups of forced laborers arrived. Jews from Łódź, Roma from nearby settlements, and captured Soviet prisoners of war were transported in small contingents. Early Einsatzgruppen reports note the rapid exhaustion of physical labor by these groups. They were tasked with clearing forested areas, dismantling local structures, and preparing rudimentary holding facilities. These laborers would serve a dual purpose: performing essential camp construction and, in smaller numbers, being the first subjects of experimental killing methods. The earliest experiments were rudimentary but lethal. Before the establishment of permanent gas chambers, the SS explored mobile solutions. Captured vehicles, trucks from local depots or requisitioned from nearby towns, were adapted for the purpose of killing en masse. Exhaust pipes were redirected into enclosed compartments. Early tests were conducted under the supervision of Lange, who meticulously documented the time required for death and the mechanical modifications necessary to maintain efficiency. Reports from these sessions, dated mid-1940, reveal a clinical detachment that belied the human suffering within those metal vans. Death was measured, timed, and recorded as though evaluating a factory process. By late 1940, Chełmno had transitioned from survey site to fully operational pilot facility. Makeshift holding pens, constructed from local timber, contained hundreds of prisoners at a time. Routine forced labor persisted, clearing woods, maintaining roads, and preparing the grounds for mass operations. SS records describe the initial victims with detached precision. Approximately 200 Jews transported from Łódź on December 15th, executed by gas van, duration 12 to 15 minutes. No personal identifiers were included in these early notes, emphasizing the dehumanization intrinsic to the operation. The moral horror of these early months is inseparable from the operational detail. Witness testimonies collected post-war described the first convoys arriving from Łódź. Men, women and children were herded into trucks, their protests ignored, their fear noted in silent registers. Some labourers attempted escape. Most were shot immediately. Those selected for the gas vans were typically the elderly, the infirm, or children, those considered unfit for forced labour. The vans moved along narrow, forested roads, the muffled sounds of engines masking the cries of the victims. SS officers timed the journeys with stopwatches, recording the intervals from engine start to silence. Each test refined the vehicle, each adjustment improved efficiency, each log entry removed another layer of humanity from the victim. Meanwhile, local Polish residents observed from a distance, often too frightened to intervene. Sporadic rumours reached the countryside: disappearances, strange night convoys, the occasional scream that carried on the cold winter air. SS guards implemented strict secrecy protocols. Letters, telegrams, and civilian inquiries were intercepted or destroyed. The operational philosophy was clear. Concealment was as important as execution. Chełmno would function in the shadows, a laboratory for death unseen by the outside world. By the end of 1941, the camp infrastructure had expanded considerably. Timber barracks were replaced with sturdier structures. Roads within the forest were widened to accommodate multiple gas vans. Lange and Blobel continued their oversight, periodically reporting to Berlin with detailed statistical summaries: numbers transported, numbers killed, duration of experiments, and mechanical performance of each vehicle. Early estimates suggest that several thousand victims had passed through Chełmno by the close of 1941, though records were fragmentary and deliberately coded. The clinical methodology applied at Chełmno during these formative years marked a sinister innovation. The camp served as a testing ground, not only for technical processes, but for the bureaucratic machinery of genocide. The use of mobile killing vans prefigured later stationary gas chambers in Auschwitz and other extermination camps. Here, in the frozen forests along the water, the blueprint for industrialized murder took shape, combining logistical planning, mechanized execution, and meticulous record-keeping. Even as the SS refined their methods, the human cost was immediate and profound. Jews, Roma, and Soviet prisoners, each life reduced to a number on a transport list, suffered unspeakably. The operational language of the SS, efficiency, processing, disposal, masked the moral enormity of their actions. Chełmno was, in every sense, a laboratory of death, where geography, technology, and ideology intersected to create a template for the Holocaust that would reverberate across occupied Europe. By December 1941, Chełmno was fully operational as the first site of systematic mechanized murder in the Warthegau. Lange continued to supervise, Blobel continued to advise, and the silent forests bore witness to atrocities that would later be documented in chilling detail. The early experiments, once confined to small numbers of victims and improvised vehicles, had evolved into a methodical, replicable system. Chełmno, isolated and obscured, had become the grim prototype that would inform the subsequent machinery of the final solution. January 1942. Chełmno's winter had deepened, and the dense forests surrounding the village were blanketed in snow, muting sound and isolating the camp from nearby settlements. It was in this frozen silence that Herbert Lange and his subordinates advanced the next phase of their operational experiment, the mechanization of killing. The mobile gas van, an innovation that would distinguish Chełmno from earlier Einsatzgruppen executions, was not a spontaneous invention, but the product of systematic experimentation, logistical planning, and bureaucratic oversight. The first gas vans arrived at Chełmno in December 1941, requisitioned from local municipal and commercial sources. These vehicles, initially ordinary trucks, were modified by SS mechanics under Lange's supervision. The cargo compartments, previously intended for goods or livestock, were sealed airtight. Exhaust pipes were rerouted into the compartments to deliver lethal carbon monoxide. Early trials, conducted with small numbers of prisoners deemed unfit for labour, allowed the SS to calibrate engine power, compartment size, and exposure time. Each adjustment was documented meticulously. Efficiency and reliability were prioritised over concealment of suffering. The process of selection for the gas vans followed an equally systematic approach. SS records from early 1942 indicate that victims were categorised according to age, health, and perceived productivity. Children, the elderly, and those deemed physically incapable of forced labour were prioritised for the vans. Unlike the shootings executed by Einsatzgruppen units, which often relied on local collaboration or improvised killing sites, the gas vans represented a controlled environment. Victims were loaded into the vehicles under guard, often under the pretext of relocation or resettlement. SS personnel observed from outside, noting behaviour, timing, and mechanical performance, treating the operation as a scientific procedure. Operational logs reveal the incremental adjustments made to the vans. Early runs indicated that death occurred over approximately 15 minutes in a fully loaded truck. The exhaust system required modifications to prevent leakage, and interior ventilation had to be minimised without risking mechanical failure. Guards were instructed to maintain strict discipline, ensuring that no individuals escaped or created disturbances. Each trip into the surrounding forest concluded with the truck returning to base, where the bodies were removed and prepared for disposal. The water river and shallow graves in nearby forest clearings became the initial disposal sites. The psychological toll on SS personnel is documented sparingly but significantly. Lange's own reports reference the need to rotate drivers and guards to prevent fatigue or hesitation. Despite the operational detachment encouraged by SS ideology, witnesses later described visible stress and mechanical repetition, as if the act of murder required the same careful attention as any industrial process. Still, the methodology evolved with chilling efficiency. By February 1942, the SS could transport and execute between 200 and 300 victims per van per day. Operations were timed to optimize concealment and minimize the risk of detection by locals or partisan activity. Contemporaneous accounts, corroborated by post-war interrogations of Lange and his subordinates, emphasize the novelty of this mechanized approach. Whereas Einsatzgruppen shootings required large numbers of personnel and exposed officers to direct violence, the gas vans allowed a smaller cadre to carry out mass murder with minimal direct contact. This innovation represented not only a technological adaptation, but a bureaucratic solution. The vehicles were mobile, repeatable, and easily integrated into transport schedules. They transformed Chełmno from a localized execution site into a functional prototype for industrialized killing. The arrival of the vans also marked a shift in victim processing. Prisoners were now confined to holding pens for shorter periods, often just hours before loading. Selection was performed quickly but systematically. SS personnel documented each individual's name, origin, and assigned compartment, creating a ledger of human lives reduced to operational units. Deportation convoys from the Łódź ghetto became routine, each vehicle dispatched under strict secrecy. Local civilians, aware only of transient truck traffic, rarely grasped the scale or method of the operations, though rumours of disappearances and screams began to circulate in nearby villages. Post-war survivor testimonies provide a fragmented but vital perspective on these early operations. Those who escaped or witnessed initial gas van executions described the vehicles as enclosed metal boxes, deafening and suffocating, where panic and cries were audible through the thin walls. Victims were conscious for the first minutes of exposure, their confusion and terror a testament to the inhuman efficiency of the system. For the SS, these reactions were data points: duration of death, vehicle performance, and guard efficiency. Each trip refined the methodology, transforming individual suffering into procedural knowledge. The refinement process was not solely mechanical. Lange and his officers continuously evaluated procedural logistics, the routing of convoys, timing to avoid local detection, and coordination with transport units. Early challenges included frozen roads, mechanical failures, and occasional resistance from victims. Each incident prompted adjustments: preheating engines in winter, reinforcing compartment walls, and adjusting loading protocols. By March 1942, these refinements produced a system capable of sustained daily operations with minimal operational disruption, setting a precedent for later extermination campaigns across occupied Poland. The ethical abstraction maintained by the SS is starkly evident in surviving operational reports. Terms such as processing, capacity utilization, and dispatch dominate internal communications. Human life was quantified, measured, and catalogued with administrative rigor. Reports detail the number of victims per convoy, the duration of each execution, and logistical considerations such as fuel consumption and vehicle maintenance. No mention is made of suffering, only efficiency. In this environment, murder was transformed into a calculable, replicable industrial process. Chełmno's innovations extended beyond technology. The camp also pioneered the bureaucratic integration of mass murder into the broader administrative apparatus of the Reich. Coordination with local transport authorities, ghetto administration, and regional SS commands ensured a continuous supply of victims. Letters and telegrams from Berlin emphasize the importance of timeliness, secrecy, and documentation. The gas van operations became a model for subsequent sites. Mobility, efficiency, and concealment were combined with rigid administrative oversight. By the end of March 1942, Chełmno had solidified its role as the first operational site for mechanized killing in occupied Poland. Hundreds of victims had been executed in gas vans, each trip producing data for the refinement of techniques later employed in Auschwitz, Majdanek, and other extermination camps. The combination of mobile technology, systematic selection, and administrative rigor created a prototype for industrialized murder that would define the Holocaust's subsequent phases. The introduction of gas vans marked a turning point not only in operational methodology, but in the conceptual approach to genocide. Chełmno's forested isolation allowed experimentation without interference, while the water, river, and remote disposal sites ensured that the outside world remained unaware. The camp's evolution from a survey site to a fully operational mechanized killing center demonstrated the capacity of Nazi bureaucracy to integrate technological innovation, procedural detachment, and logistical planning into a coherent system of mass murder. By April 1942, Chełmno had transitioned from experimental operations to a routine of systematic extermination. The gas vans, now fully integrated into the camp's operational protocol, transported victims from the Łódź ghetto, surrounding villages, and temporary holding sites. For those selected, the journey from capture to death was swift, ordered, and inescapable. Yet beyond operational logs and technical reports, the lived experience of the victims, those reduced to numbers, compartments, and logistical data, remains the most critical measure of Chełmno's early operations. Upon arrival at the camp, prisoners were held in small corrals or pens constructed hastily against the forest's edge. Contemporary photographs and post-war testimonies describe low wooden fences, temporary shelters, and primitive sanitation. SS guards, often young men recruited from regional units, maintained strict order. The prisoners, primarily Jews and Roma, but also Soviet prisoners of war, were aware that they had been removed from their homes permanently. Fear and uncertainty permeated the holding areas. Hunger, Cold and exhaustion were compounded by the psychological strain of separation from family and community. Selections were made quickly. Lange and his officers oversaw the process with methodical detachment. Individuals who were sick, elderly, or unable to perform forced labour were singled out for immediate execution. Others, temporarily spared for work in administrative or logistical support roles, remained in the camp for shorter periods before eventual disposal. The selection process, though brief, was precise. Prisoners were catalogued, recorded, and assigned to vans or work detail, creating a chilling ledger of life and death. Victims often clung to ritual or small acts of normalcy as a means of psychological survival. Eyewitness accounts describe whispered prayers, attempts to comfort children, and small gestures of solidarity among strangers. Yet these human behaviours were brutally undercut by the operational design of the camp. Guards enforced silence and compliance, and any act of resistance or panic was met with immediate punishment. The psychological environment was engineered to enforce submission, eroding agency and intensifying fear. The gas van trips themselves represented the apex of terror and the final stage of systematic dehumanization. Victims were crowded into sealed compartments, sometimes standing shoulder to shoulder. As engines were activated, carbon monoxide filled the confined space. Contemporary survivor testimonies, corroborated by post-war interrogations of Lange and his staff, report that consciousness persisted for several minutes. Victims experienced panic, suffocation, and confusion, sometimes attempting to break windows or doors. Guards were trained to treat these reactions as operational anomalies, noting delays or irregularities in time to death as technical issues rather than human suffering. Observational accounts, both contemporary and post-war, detail the physical consequences of the gas. Initial convulsions, coughing, and attempts to flee were followed by collapse and unconsciousness. Bodies were removed at the forest edge or riverbank, where shallow graves were dug or corpses were prepared for incineration. The water river, sometimes used to conceal remains, became a silent witness to the camp's industrialized killing. Lange's reports noted processing time per convoy, vehicle capacity utilization, and disposal efficiency, with no reference to the individuals themselves. Human life was subsumed entirely into metrics and operational planning. Despite the systematic nature of the killings, occasional acts of resistance or unexpected events occurred. Prisoners attempted to escape during unloading, hide among logs, or feign illness to delay selection. Most of these efforts were thwarted. Guards were prepared and dogs were used to patrol perimeters. A few escapes were documented in local police reports, though successful survival was rare. Even so, these incidents reveal the instinctual human response to extreme threat and the agency that persisted despite overwhelming oppression. The early operations also had a profound social and cultural impact on the communities surrounding Chełmno. Local villagers, aware of the sudden disappearance of neighbours, often speculated about the fate of the deported. Rumours circulated about shootings, disease, or forced labour. Yet the camp's isolation and the secrecy surrounding the gas van operations limited outside knowledge. SS coordination with regional authorities ensured that official records remained opaque and misleading, framing the operations as administrative relocation rather than systematic murder. Post-war testimonies from survivors who were temporarily spared for labour provide further insight into daily life at Chełmno. Work assignments included clearing land, maintaining trucks, handling supplies, or assisting in administrative documentation. These survivors describe a climate of perpetual fear, the knowledge that any lapse, misstep, or complaint could result in immediate execution. Yet even in this environment, small acts of defiance persisted, sharing food, comforting the weak, or silently memorizing names and faces to preserve memory. Such acts were attempts to assert humanity in a setting designed to erase it. Medical experiments and pseudoscientific observations also occurred sporadically. SS personnel documented the effects of carbon monoxide exposure, vehicle overcrowding, and victim resistance. While not on the scale of the later Auschwitz experiments, these early observations contributed to the SS understanding of mechanized killing efficiency. These data were subsequently incorporated into reports sent to Berlin, influencing policy and practice at other sites. The human cost of Chełmno's early operations was staggering. From April to December 1942, estimates suggest that several thousand individuals were killed using the gas vans. Records indicate a ratio of nearly one convoy per day, with each van transporting between 200 and 300 victims. These figures, drawn from surviving transport logs, SS reports, and post-war interrogation documents, provide a clinical measure of scale but cannot capture the individual suffering endured. Each number represents families broken, communities erased, and human potential extinguished. In historical retrospect, Chełmno's early operations reveal both the innovation and the bureaucratic ruthlessness of the Holocaust. The mechanized efficiency of the gas vans, combined with meticulous selection, transport, and disposal procedures, exemplified a system in which murder was normalized and industrialized. Yet alongside these technical and administrative details lies the enduring testimony of human suffering: fear, resistance, grief, and the desperate attempts to maintain dignity in the face of annihilation. By the end of 1942, Chełmno had firmly established itself as a template for the Reich's evolving genocide machinery. The gas vans were operationally refined, victim selection was systematized, and the surrounding environment ensured secrecy. The psychological and social dimensions of the camp, both for victims and perpetrators, demonstrated the complex interplay of ideology, bureaucracy, and human behavior in the execution of mass murder. The lessons learned at Chełmno would inform the broader machinery of extermination that defined the Holocaust in subsequent years, providing a grim precedent for the camps that followed. By January 1943, Chełmno had evolved from an experimental killing site into a fully operational extermination camp. Under the direction of SS Untersturmführer Herbert Lange and his deputy Paul Blobel, the camp optimized its procedures for efficiency, secrecy, and scale. The gas vans, which had initially served as a provisional method for mass murder, were now central to the camp's function. The lessons learned from prior months informed daily operations. Precise scheduling of transports, methodical corpse disposal, and careful documentation ensured that the industrialized killing could proceed uninterrupted. Transport schedules became tightly regimented. Convoys from the Łódź ghetto were coordinated with railway authorities to minimize visibility and maintain secrecy. Victims were held briefly in staging areas near the camp, then loaded into gas vans in groups of 150 to 200. The vehicles were engineered for maximal capacity while maintaining operational reliability. Modifications included reinforced compartments, sealed ventilation, and dual exhaust systems to ensure lethal carbon monoxide exposure. Observers noted that the efficiency of these vans allowed for multiple trips per day, dramatically increasing the camp's output compared to earlier months. Within the camp itself, infrastructure improvements facilitated the systematic processing of victims. Temporary holding pens were replaced with larger corrals capable of accommodating hundreds of individuals simultaneously. Guards were instructed in the rapid and controlled movement of prisoners, ensuring that panic was minimized during loading. Meanwhile, documentation processes were refined. Transport logs, prisoner counts, and van maintenance records were meticulously maintained, creating an administrative ledger that mirrored the camp's operational precision. The disposal of bodies also underwent systematic optimization. Initially, shallow graves and river burials sufficed. By early 1943, shallow pits were supplemented by mobile incineration methods, particularly during periods of increased activity or when weather conditions prevented burial. Corpses were transported under guard to the water river's edge or adjacent forested areas, where execution of disposal protocols was both routine and detached. Post-war interrogations of camp personnel consistently emphasized that the efficiency of body removal was measured in minutes per transport, reflecting a clinical prioritization of process over human life. The human experience within Chełmno continued to be one of terror and dehumanization. Prisoners were acutely aware of the camp's operational rhythm: arrival, selection, transport, and death. Survivors who endured temporary work assignments described a pervasive atmosphere of anxiety, punctuated by the routine movement of vans and the distant cries of victims. Children, often transported alongside parents, faced the same rapid progression from capture to death. Witness accounts described the psychological strain imposed on both children and adults, noting attempts to maintain familial contact or comfort, despite the inevitability of separation and execution. By mid-1943, the camp also implemented procedural variations designed to reduce technical errors and increase throughput. Drivers and guards received standardized training in vehicle operation, crowd control, and corpse handling. Maintenance schedules were formalized, ensuring that van engines and exhaust systems remained operational under constant use. Even minor technical malfunctions were documented in camp logs, reflecting the methodical attention to operational detail that characterized Chełmno's peak phase. The SS personnel themselves operated within a hierarchy of responsibility and oversight. Lange and Blobel maintained direct supervision over daily activities, while junior officers managed logistics, vehicle readiness, and documentation. Witness testimonies suggest that while some guards expressed personal discomfort with the operations, the organizational culture emphasized obedience, efficiency, and detachment. Acts of individual mercy or disobedience were rare and swiftly penalized, underscoring the institutional reinforcement of systemic brutality. Chełmno's operations during this period also had broader implications for the Nazi extermination program. Techniques refined at Chełmno informed procedures at subsequent camps, particularly in the use of mobile killing units and streamlined victim processing. Reports circulated to Berlin detailed convoy capacities, van performance, and the psychological responses of victims, providing a blueprint for other Einsatzgruppen and extermination facilities. Chełmno's operational model demonstrated that mechanized mass murder could be systematized, measured, and scaled with administrative precision. Despite the calculated efficiency of the camp, unexpected challenges occasionally arose. Inclement weather, mechanical failures, and minor prisoner uprisings required adaptive responses. Post-war accounts detail instances in which vans stalled, guards lost control of small groups, or local villagers inadvertently observed transports. In each case, camp personnel responded with a combination of procedural adjustment and heightened security, further refining the operational framework. By June 1943, Chełmno had reached the apex of its destructive capacity. Daily convoys were routine, administrative documentation was comprehensive, and the gas vans had been optimized for both lethality and operational reliability. Yet behind these metrics lay the enduring human tragedy: thousands of lives extinguished, families shattered, and communities irrevocably erased. The camp's peak operations exemplify the industrialization of murder, the bureaucratic normalization of atrocity, and the chilling effectiveness of a system designed to annihilate human life with mechanical precision. By mid-1943, Chełmno had solidified its function as an extermination hub, yet within its terror-laden perimeter, traces of human resistance and observation persisted. While the camp was primarily designed to operate with mechanical efficiency, the lived experiences of prisoners, local inhabitants, and even some German personnel revealed fractures in the facade of control. These narratives, sparse yet significant, illuminate the undercurrents of human resilience amid systemic annihilation. Prisoners subjected to forced labor within the camp's confines became inadvertent witnesses to the machinery of murder. Those assigned to clean the vans, transport corpses, or maintain equipment observed the methodical execution of daily operations. Despite the pervasive climate of fear, a few documented acts of defiance emerged. Post-war testimonies recount prisoners deliberately slowing the handling of bodies, misaligning the transport of corpses, or surreptitiously leaving evidence of atrocities in hidden spaces. These acts, while often minor in scale, represented the assertion of moral agency under extreme duress. Children, many of whom arrived with their families from the Łódź ghetto, occasionally became unintended chroniclers of camp life. Their limited understanding of the processes around them belied the acute awareness of danger. Witness statements recorded after the war describe children hiding small objects, memorizing sequences of events, or communicating secretly with other prisoners. The ability of these young individuals to internalize routines, recall transport schedules, and convey information to elders underscores a form of passive resistance and situational intelligence that became vital for survival. Local civilians, positioned on the periphery of the camp, also bore witness. The villages surrounding Chełmno, though largely insulated from direct exposure, experienced the indirect effects of the camp's operations: the hum of engines, the distant wailing of victims, and the movement of convoys along rural roads. Some villagers, bound by fear and occupation laws, discreetly relayed information to relatives or local resistance networks. Others attempted minor interventions, such as providing food or water to escaped prisoners, though such acts were exceedingly dangerous and often met with severe reprisals. Within the SS ranks, there were also occasional observers who noted the psychological toll of Chełmno's daily operations. Post-war interrogations of camp personnel revealed that even among officers trained in ideological indoctrination, the repetitive nature of mechanized killing induced stress, moral conflict, and sometimes operational errors. One Lange-era adjutant testified that a driver of a gas van had intentionally slowed a convoy after witnessing the fear in a child's eyes, reflecting the subtle, though rare, manifestations of conscience. These moments, though not halting the machinery of death, suggest that the camp's absolute authority was neither uncontested nor entirely internalized by all participants. The camp's prisoners, particularly those temporarily assigned to work details outside the immediate execution sites, occasionally left physical traces of defiance. Diaries, scratched messages, and small carvings found post-war in surrounding forests or concealed within barracks offer insight into the human response to extreme oppression. These fragments, though limited in scope, provide critical documentation of awareness, memory, and silent protest. They reveal that even within a system designed to obliterate identity, individuals sought to preserve their existence and bear witness to atrocities. Efforts at organized resistance were extremely limited due to the camp's tight security and the rapidity of executions. Yet the psychological and moral strategies of survival were notable. Older prisoners instructed younger ones on the importance of compliance, observation, and mental resilience. Some devised subtle systems of signaling between labor groups to share information about convoy schedules, guard rotations, and the timing of van departures. While these measures could not halt the killings, they offered a semblance of agency and the possibility of life-saving foresight for a select few. The intersection of external intelligence and resistance networks also contributed to Chełmno's historical record. Polish underground operatives occasionally intercepted information about the camp's operations, relaying details to Allied contacts. Reports, though incomplete and sometimes delayed, confirmed the existence of gas vans and the systemic execution of civilians. These accounts informed broader strategic understandings of Nazi extermination policies and contributed to post-war documentation efforts. Chełmno's operational secrecy, however, remained largely effective. The camp's geographical isolation, the regimented timing of transports, and the controlled flow of information limited the potential for organized uprising or mass escape. Nevertheless, the very act of witnessing, whether by prisoners, children, local civilians, or reluctant German personnel, produced a spectrum of human responses that complicated the perception of total control. Fear, defiance, observation, and moral judgment intersected within this microcosm of terror, leaving behind fragments of resistance that would later inform historical understanding. By December 1943, Chełmno had completed a full year of intensified extermination operations. The meticulous scheduling of gas vans, the bureaucratic documentation, and the optimization of corpse disposal had reached a grim proficiency. Yet alongside this industrialized murder existed hidden narratives of resilience, subtle defiance, and witness testimony. These accounts, pieced together from survivor interviews, post-war interrogations, and local intelligence, illustrate that even amid systematic annihilation, the human spirit, though battered, constrained, and largely powerless, found avenues to observe, remember, and resist. These hidden narratives became crucial for post-war historical reconstruction. Testimonies from Chełmno survivors and peripheral witnesses formed the backbone of later investigative efforts, informing both academic research and public understanding of the Holocaust. They highlighted not only the scale of atrocity, but also the resilience of those who endured and observed. The intersection of operational efficiency and human agency at Chełmno underscores the dual realities of the camp, an industrialized mechanism of death and a site where human experience persisted, however marginally, against overwhelming forces. By January 1944, Chełmno had entered the final phase of its operational existence, though at its height it had already claimed tens of thousands of lives. The camp's management, which had been largely centralized under Herbert Lange and his deputies, underwent structural adjustments reflecting broader SS strategies and logistical pressures. These reconfigurations were motivated by several converging factors: the shifting front lines of the Eastern and Western theatres, increased scrutiny from German High Command regarding labour allocation, and the evolving technical approach to mass murder, which was transitioning towards stationary gas chambers in other locations. Operationally, Chełmno's gas van program remained active, though efficiency was increasingly tempered by mechanical failures, driver fatigue, and wartime material shortages. Vans, which had previously executed dozens of victims per day, now required more frequent maintenance. The Lockheed-style diesel engines, repurposed for suffocating human cargo, suffered breakdowns that sometimes left prisoners conscious for longer than intended, producing heightened psychological strain for both victims and operators. Lange's administrative notes, preserved in post-war interrogations and surviving SS documentation, record recurring frustrations over these mechanical limitations. By 1944, he explicitly advocated for the delegation of vehicle maintenance to trained mechanics, emphasizing uninterrupted operational tempo as a priority. The personnel structure at Chełmno evolved alongside these technical adjustments. New SS units rotated into the camp from other regions of occupied Poland, often replacing veterans who had served since 1941. These recruits, less indoctrinated in the specific routines of van operations, initially exhibited higher error rates in aligning transports, sealing compartments, and coordinating corpse disposal. Supervision became stricter. Officers implemented daily briefings, checklists, and a layered hierarchy to ensure that errors did not disrupt the execution schedule. Surviving records indicate that some replacements displayed psychological strain or outright refusal to participate, though such instances were rare and dealt with through reassignment, intimidation, or punitive measures. Alongside these structural changes, the prisoner population continued to fluctuate, largely sourced from the Łódź ghetto and nearby towns. By early 1944, Soviet POWs and Roma groups were increasingly represented in the labour contingents, fulfilling roles in corpse handling, fuel procurement, and site maintenance. Forced labour became both a tactical necessity and a psychological instrument. Prisoners who witnessed the extermination process, even peripherally, served as living reminders of the camp's reach, reinforcing the terror apparatus without direct oversight. Survivor testimonies later emphasized that the rotation of laborers, combined with punitive disciplinary routines, maintained an environment of constant anxiety and disorientation, effectively suppressing organized resistance. Chełmno's decline was accelerated by broader strategic developments in the Nazi war effort. By mid-1944, Soviet advances into Poland and the disruption of supply lines posed significant operational risks. The camp's remote location, once an asset in concealing mass executions, now complicated resource delivery, particularly fuel and food for both prisoners and SS personnel. Correspondence within the SS administrative network highlights repeated concerns over the sustainability of mobile killing operations under wartime scarcity. These logistical strains prompted preliminary discussions regarding the cessation of activities at Chełmno and the transfer of remaining prisoners to other extermination sites equipped with stationary gas chambers, notably Auschwitz-Birkenau and Treblinka. In parallel, intelligence leaks and partisan activity increased the perception of vulnerability. While the camp had operated under a veil of secrecy for nearly 4 years, the encroachment of Soviet partisans and Polish resistance networks introduced new risks. Couriers and local informants occasionally observed transport movements, engine sounds, and patrol patterns, relaying information to underground organizations. Although these observations did not immediately disrupt camp operations, they underscored the decreasing strategic insulation of Chełmno and contributed to SS concerns regarding operational security. Psychologically, the toll on both victims and perpetrators intensified during this final year. Surviving personnel reported heightened stress, fatigue, and desensitization, though some also noted emerging moral conflict. Drivers, mechanics, and clerks described a growing awareness of the scale and repetitive nature of mass murder, particularly when confronted with failures or unplanned incidents. Several post-war interrogations revealed that younger SS recruits occasionally expressed discomfort with their assigned tasks, demonstrating that even within the tightly controlled hierarchy, human emotion and ethical reflection persisted, albeit without altering the machinery of death. For prisoners, survival strategies evolved in response to declining operational efficiency and increasing environmental hazards. Those tasked with van operations or corpse disposal sometimes exploited mechanical failures to delay execution. Others engaged in covert communication networks, exchanging information about transport timing, guard routines, and potential escape routes. While large-scale resistance remained impossible, these adaptive behaviors reflect the resilience of human agency under extreme constraint. Survivor accounts later emphasized that memory, observation, and small acts of discretion became critical tools for enduring the camp's final months. By late 1944, systematic destruction of evidence became a priority. SS directives mandated the removal and cremation of remaining corpses, the dismantling of auxiliary structures, and the obliteration of records documenting van operations. The intent was to erase physical traces of extermination and minimize post-war accountability. This end-phase activity required extensive labor from remaining prisoners, forcing them to witness not only executions, but also the erasure of the physical and documentary markers of those deaths. Post-war documentation from the Allied investigations highlights the meticulous nature of these efforts, emphasizing both their scope and the psychological cruelty inflicted upon surviving laborers. Chełmno's cessation was formalized by December 1944. Remaining prisoners were transferred to other camps, and the SS evacuated much of its equipment and personnel. While the camp's physical structures persisted temporarily, the operational apparatus that had facilitated systematic extermination for nearly 4 years was dismantled. Local observers noted the abrupt absence of convoys, engine hums, and visible patrols, marking the end of Chełmno's active phase. Yet the camp's legacy, preserved in survivor testimony, SS records, and post-war investigations, remained a vital historical resource for understanding the evolution of mobile killing techniques and the early experimentation with mechanized extermination. In retrospect, Chełmno's final year reflects the convergence of operational refinement, logistical adaptation, and moral decay. The camp transitioned from an experimental site of mobile extermination to a fully realized, though increasingly strained, mechanism of death. Structural reorganization, personnel rotations, and the looming threat of Allied advances defined this period, illustrating both the adaptability of the SS and the relentless pressures exerted upon the camp's victims. Chełmno's decline, therefore, was not merely a cessation of activity, but a complex interplay of strategic, logistical, and human factors that presaged the broader collapse of Nazi extermination operations in occupied Poland. By January 1945, Chełmno had ceased its operations as an extermination site, but the physical and documentary remnants of its atrocities remained, partially concealed within the forests of the Warthegau. The final months of 1944 had seen the systematic dismantling of gas vans, the burning of corpses, and the attempted obliteration of administrative records. SS personnel, aware of the impending collapse of the Eastern Front under Soviet pressure, prioritized erasure over continued efficiency. Yet despite these efforts, traces persisted, structural remnants, charred earth, and partially destroyed records that would prove essential to Allied investigators and historians in the post-war years. The withdrawal of SS personnel left a precarious environment, both for surviving prisoners and for local civilians. Those transferred from Chełmno were dispersed across camps such as Auschwitz-Birkenau and Stutthof, while a small contingent of labourers remained behind temporarily to complete the destruction of evidence. Survivor testimonies later emphasized the psychological torment of this final labour. Prisoners were forced to burn corpses in open-air pyres, dismantle vehicle compartments, and erase markings from transport routes. Each act of erasure became a further act of witness, forcing them to observe and participate in the systematic obliteration of proof, while already traumatized by the initial atrocities. Allied investigators arrived in Chełmno in early 1945 as Soviet forces advanced through northern Poland. Initial reconnaissance revealed the extensive environmental impact of mobile extermination, soil contamination from mass cremations, flattened vegetation along transport routes, and the subtle, lingering odour of decomposition. Forensic specialists and intelligence officers noted that while the SS had attempted to conceal evidence, the scale of operations had left inevitable traces. Burnt fragments of vans, residual ash pits, and scorched vehicle tracks provided tangible confirmation of mass executions, supplementing survivor testimony and the limited documentary record that had escaped destruction. The U.S. Army's Strategic Bombing Survey and intelligence officers collaborated with local Polish authorities to catalogue these remnants. A systematic approach was employed. Each pit, structure, and forest clearing was photographed, mapped, and documented in written reports. Investigators noted recurring patterns that corroborated earlier accounts of van operations: proximity of roads to forests, concealed loading areas, and dispersal points for human remains. Although this work was painstaking, it established a methodical, verifiable record that could be used for post-war tribunals and historical research. Polish civilian testimonies were equally critical. Local residents recalled unusual nighttime activity, the sounds of engines and trucks, and occasional sightings of prisoners forced along secluded routes. While initial accounts were fragmented and often filtered through fear or trauma, investigators combined multiple narratives to construct a reliable chronology of operations. These civilian observations also corroborated the pattern of victim selection and transportation described in surviving SS records, highlighting the integration of local geography into Chełmno's operational design. Captured documents from the SS and the post-war interrogations of officers, including Herbert Lange's deputies, provided additional layers of evidence. Lange himself had been killed in 1945 during combat on the Eastern Front, but post-war interrogations of surviving personnel offered detailed insights into logistical operations, personnel rotations, and the strategic rationale behind the camp's mobile killing program. Notably, these testimonies confirmed that Chełmno had served as a prototype for subsequent extermination methods employed at Auschwitz and other camps, particularly in the use of mobile gas vans and the coordination of forced labour for body disposal. A critical challenge for investigators was the verification of victim numbers. Unlike Auschwitz or Treblinka, Chełmno had not maintained centralized death registries, and the SS's efforts to destroy evidence further obscured the total count. Investigators relied on cross-referencing multiple sources, transport lists from the Łódź ghetto, surviving SS administrative notes, post-war interviews with personnel, and forensic analysis of cremation sites. Estimates converged on tens of thousands of victims, predominantly Jews from the Warthegau and Łódź ghetto, alongside Roma populations and Soviet POWs. While exact numbers remained elusive, the convergence of multiple independent sources provided strong empirical support for the scale of Chełmno's operations. Technical analysis of the gas vans themselves offered further insight into the methodology and efficiency of mobile killing. Investigators documented engine modifications, exhaust routing, and loading compartment dimensions, establishing a timeline of mechanical experimentation and refinement. Notably, variations in van design over the camp's operational period reflected lessons learned from early mechanical failures and human factors considerations. These findings corroborated survivor testimonies describing prolonged suffocation periods, the psychological strain on both victims and operators, and the gradual optimization of execution protocols. By mid-1945, the accumulated evidence from Chełmno formed a foundational case study for Allied war crimes investigations. The physical, documentary, and testimonial records allowed investigators to reconstruct operational sequences with a high degree of accuracy. These reconstructions were subsequently used in the Nuremberg trials and other post-war proceedings to demonstrate both the systematic nature of Nazi extermination policies and the specific role of mobile killing vans as precursors to stationary gas chambers. Chełmno's operational history, once hidden in the Warthegau forests, became a crucial element in establishing the legal and historical record of the Holocaust. The post-war recovery effort also revealed the broader societal impact of Chełmno. Communities surrounding the camp had been indirectly complicit through enforced silence and cooperation under threat of violence. Investigators noted patterns of coerced assistance, passive observation, and post-war attempts at suppression or denial. This socio-psychological dimension highlighted the pervasive reach of the camp's terror, extending beyond the immediate victim population to affect civilian perception, memory, and participation in the wartime order. By the end of 1945, Chełmno had transitioned from an active extermination site to a subject of methodical historical documentation. The camp's destruction, while extensive, could not erase the multi-layered evidence preserved in surviving van components, structural remnants, forensic traces, and human memory. Analysts concluded that Chełmno had pioneered techniques subsequently adopted elsewhere, bridging the gap between early decentralized killing methods and the industrialized extermination that characterized later phases of the Holocaust. The post-war period, therefore, marked both a closure of operational history and the emergence of Chełmno as a critical case study for understanding the evolution of Nazi extermination strategies. In retrospect, the recovery of evidence at Chełmno illustrated the interplay between deliberate erasure, environmental persistence, and human memory. Each surviving artifact, whether a fragment of metal, a scorched earth plot, or a recorded testimony, provided a tangible connection to systematic atrocities. The meticulous post-war documentation not only facilitated legal accountability, but also ensured that Chełmno's role in pioneering mobile killing methods would be preserved for future generations. The camp's history, once hidden in isolation and terror, became an enduring testament to both human cruelty and the perseverance of memory in the face of obliteration. The end of World War II did not mark an end to Chełmno's story. In the aftermath of Nazi Germany's defeat, Chełmno became central to the judicial and historical reckoning of Holocaust crimes. Unlike larger camps such as Auschwitz or Treblinka, Chełmno's operations had left minimal physical documentation, and the SS's deliberate destruction of evidence complicated efforts to assign accountability. Yet the convergence of survivor testimony, fragments of van structures, and captured SS documents provided sufficient grounds for post-war tribunals to define both individual and systemic culpability. In 1946, the first significant trial related to Chełmno began in Łódź under Polish jurisdiction. A small cadre of former SS personnel, including lower-ranking guards and administrative staff, faced the court. Proceedings relied heavily on survivor testimonies, many recounting forced labour in the camp's final months, witnessing mass executions, or observing the operation of gas vans. Witnesses, such as Shlomo M., a survivor from the Łódź ghetto, provided harrowing accounts of victims loaded into trucks, sealed, and driven into surrounding forests. His testimony highlighted not only the mechanics of killing, but also the psychological toll on prisoners and perpetrators alike. The prosecution faced major challenges. Many senior SS officers, including Herbert Lange, had died in combat before capture, while others evaded arrest or fled Western Europe. Interrogations of captured personnel, however, illuminated operational hierarchies and decision-making processes. Paul Blobel, whose prior experience with Einsatzgruppen informed mobile killing strategies, had already been tried and executed elsewhere, but former subordinates corroborated orders and the prioritization of extermination over forced labor or concealment. These layers of testimony allowed courts to reconstruct both individual acts and the systemic architecture enabling mobile extermination. Allied investigators simultaneously compiled detailed dossiers, integrating forensic evidence with transport logs, ghetto records, and civilian accounts. Though van components and cremation sites had largely been destroyed, remnants discovered in nearby forests confirmed survivor narratives. Engine parts, exhaust conduits, and structural fragments corroborated descriptions of the van's design, mechanical failures, and operational routines. Forensic analyses documented patterns consistent with systematic use, including exhaust placement, compartment dimensions, and repeated maintenance, subtle indicators of a program optimized for efficiency rather than improvised experimentation. The Łódź trials also highlighted coerced civilian labor. Polish residents, compelled by threat or fear, assisted with tasks such as transporting supplies or clearing roads. Courts distinguished between direct participation in killings and forced cooperation under duress, emphasizing the complex social dynamics at Chełmno. Lethal intent by SS personnel existed alongside coerced involvement by the local population, a pattern mirrored elsewhere in occupied Europe. By the late 1940s, Chełmno's history entered broader historiographical discourse. Scholars drew on captured documents, post-war testimonies, and field reports to situate the camp within Nazi extermination policies. Chełmno's gas vans became recognized as a transitional methodology, the first mechanized mobile implementation of mass killing that informed later stationary gas chambers at Auschwitz and other camps. This framing highlighted both the technical ingenuity and deliberate cruelty underlying Nazi planning. The 1960s brought renewed focus through international scholarship and public remembrance. Conferences at the U.S. National Archives, the Smithsonian Institution, and the Polish Institute of National Remembrance facilitated interdisciplinary analyses. Forensic specialists, historians, and legal scholars refined Chełmno's chronology, clarified ambiguities in victim counts, and contextualized the camp's strategic significance. These efforts combined archival research, forensic reconstruction, survivor oral history, and comparative study with other extermination sites. Survivor networks shaped Chełmno's historical memory. Associations of deportees from Łódź, Piotrków, and nearby communities documented experiences, compiled personal accounts, and accessed local archives. Oral histories, recorded and transcribed in Polish and English, allowed cross-referencing of logistical patterns with lived experience, strengthening the evidentiary basis for understanding the camp's function and methodology. In legal and academic circles, Chełmno became emblematic of early mechanized mass murder. Its mobile gas vans, initially experimental, demonstrated a systematic approach that informed later extermination strategies. By the end of the 1960s, legal precedents, historical publications, and public memorialization solidified Chełmno's legacy. Memorials, plaques marking unloading zones, cremation sites, and mass graves preserved geographic memory while honoring victims, transforming the camp from a hidden locus of terror into a documented site of remembrance. The cumulative work of trials, testimonies, and historical analysis created a framework that continues to inform Holocaust scholarship. Chełmno's operational history, once obscured by destruction and minimal documentation, was reconstructed through forensic, archival, and testimonial evidence. The post-war period demonstrated that even when perpetrators sought erasure, survivor memory, physical remnants, and investigative diligence could establish a credible historical record. Chełmno became both a site of atrocity and a testament to the capacity of evidence and testimony to preserve truth. Its story underscores the evolution of extermination methods, the moral calculus of perpetrators, and the enduring necessity of preserving evidence against deliberate obliteration. Chełmno became both a site of atrocity and a testament to the capacity of evidence and testimony to preserve truth. Its story underscores the evolution of extermination methods, the moral calculus of perpetrators, and the enduring necessity of preserving evidence against deliberate obliteration. It serves as a solemn reminder that even the most systematic cruelty can be documented, studied, and remembered, ensuring that the lessons of history endure. In honoring the victims, scholars, survivors, and memorials collectively safeguard both memory and moral responsibility, forging a bridge between past horrors and contemporary ethical awareness.